Welcome to Strip Club, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another installment of my bookshelf tour. This part of my bookshelf tour is going to be classics, near and dear to my heart, but the definition for classic is a sticky one. So, for example, there's a lot of books on my shelf that are considered classics that I'm not going to include in this part of the bookshelf tour because I'm going to include them in another part. After all, and I could include them in both, but I don't want the overlap, really. After all, a horror bookshelf tour would be incomplete and lesser for the fact that it did not include Dracula, right? A science fiction bookshelf tour would be lesser for the fact that it did not include Frankenstein. These are seminal texts to those genres, but they are often clumped inside classics. Why are they often clumped inside classics? So that people don't have to acknowledge and recognize genre fiction as something that can be classic. Genre fiction as something that can be transformative. Genre fiction as something that can be great. So I'm going to do my best part in including those books on those parts of the bookshelf tour. Also, there's a lot of classic poetry that I have, not included. There's a lot of the classic short stories I have, not included. They're going to be in their own sections of the bookshelf tour as well. So, oh, son of a bitch. This one should probably be here. This one should maybe be fantasy. I don't know if I have enough fantasy to do a fantasy bookshelf tour. That might have to be... I'm going to include it here. We'll do it. Hey, this is a bookshelf tour that is going to be... look, see that? See that top? See how decimated that top shelf is? Well... guess how to have that. Oh, now I've ruined everything. Okay. So let's go ahead and start before I find other things that I did not catch on my shelves before I decided to turn on the record button. Fyodor Dostoevsky, White Nights. This is one for which I had started a a read-along, I believe, back in 2017. I got 2 parts in, and I never finished. It's not that it's not good. It's really good. The writing is a little stilted, which is something that I often pawn off on the Russians, despite the fact that it might be the translator's fault. Who knows? Dostoevsky, this was really good. I was in a weird place with productivity on the channel when I started it, so I never finished it. But Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Penguin Classic version of White Nights, this was gifted to me, by the way, and I never made it through. I will, I think, return to it at some point. It was that good that I should really return to it. I don't know if I will pick up where I left off or start brand new. I might just read the parts that I have read to catch up, watch those videos, review what I had said, and then go forward. Next, we have, well, god damn it. See, Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. Heart of Darkness and selected short fiction. I have not read Heart of Darkness. Everyone tells me I would love it, so I've got to get around to it at some point, but I am not sure when, and I am not sure what other short fiction is involved here. Amy Foster, The Secret Sharer, and endnotes. These Barnes & Noble classics, that has got to be a great business move. You've got to think, I think that's all public access text. Like, what's it? I can't remember the actual term for it. You don't have to pay anything to print that because it's open for anyone to print. I imagine, at least, being as old as it is. And then they throw a timeline at the beginning. They throw in a couple essays from mostly unnotable people, an introduction from someone, and you've got a brand new product there. Interesting business strategy is the Barnes & Noble Classics. And not just Barnes & Noble. Hey, I'm not throwing that out. I have... Where are they? Not Barnes & Noble. What was the other? The first major bookstore chain to go defunct because of Amazon. Borders. I have some Borders classics somewhere. They did something similar, though I don't think they even dress things up as much as do Barnes & Noble. So I guess credit where it's due. Next, I have Anna Karenina from Leo Tolstoy. A chunker of a book. This is supposedly, depending on the list you find, it's almost always top 5 greatest books of all time, at least through my experience seeing lists of top books of all time. So it's one that I should probably get to at some point. This was a product owned by Rolling Hills, Kahn's Library, Belt Branch, 1904, North Belt Highway, St. Joseph, Missouri, 64506. I got it in a library sale. I think I got it for $0.25 or something. So the tag here is from Vladimir Nabokov, one of the greatest love stories in world literature. Speaking of Nabokov, did I grab that? Surely I did. No, I don't think it. Where is it? Where's my Lolita? Oh well. I'll get to it sometime. Oh, I grabbed it. Okay. So that's Anna Karenina, Leo Tolstoy. There's going to be a lot of Russians here. You know, I probably shouldn't include this. I should probably include this with poetry, but it's such a classic narrative poem. Paradise Lost. I know all the covers are backwards. I'm recording on an Android. It doesn't have. I can't figure out how to flip the image. You're just gonna have to bear with me. I'll try to put the books up to the camera so you can read them backwards. Actually, you know what? I lied. The titles aren't all backwards. I have satanic texts. That's the reason they look the way they do. They were written backwards in the scrawling handwriting of Leonardo da Vinci, who also wrote backwards and was friends with the devil. So those are the goals I have here on this channel. I have only satanic copies. Next, this is embarrassing. I've read a lot of classics. I'm starting off almost exclusively with things that I have not read. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. See that there? See that there, huh? You see that? I really got to get around to some Ayn Rand at some point. I have read nothing from Ayn Rand. I think Ayn Rand may have been one of literature's earliest and greatest trolls. I say that because I had English professors who would stand by everything ever written, but hated Ayn Rand. And as we are seeing Ayn Rand play out on the grand stage, they must have been wrong. They must have been mistaken. They must have just been too out of the loop. So this being Atlas Shrugged, let's see here. You're looking at a Stephen King novel, essentially. This is around 1,100 pages. And I don't know if I could even keep up with it. I have read excerpts from it. Excerpts which were supposed to be beautifully illustrating this thing or that thing, and I never got any of those things. So I don't know if this is a text that anyone can grab something out of and use it to illustrate something, or if I'm just that goddamn dense. It's possible. It's possible. I think it's possible that I'm just dense in general. But one of the things that has been interesting to me in running a channel on literature for 5 years now is that there are some writers who just don't connect with certain people and certain people who don't connect with certain writers. And you can you can think all day, this guy would really love that author. You know who she would like? She'd really like this author. And it doesn't connect. And it's weird the way it doesn't connect, but it doesn't connect. And I think that part of it might be the pretense with which someone finds a text. That's one of the ultimately incredible things about text, and, if I may say so, incredibly, one of the things that is most applicable about the incredible things about literature to quote-unquote literary fiction, into which classics often fall, because if you are having a bad day and you find Star Wars, classic fantasy, you want Luke Skywalker to win because he's the good guy. He's obviously the good guy. But depending on what day you're having while you're reading As I Lay Dying, is Darl the good guy? No, it's Cash. Cash is obviously the good guy. Well, you know, Jewel, he's just trying to do his own thing. Depending on what your relationship with your father is, that Bundren daddy, he's going to be different too. So this is one of the things that makes literary fiction pop off the page in the way it does, but it's also one of the things that makes literary fiction not connect with everyone all the time. So if you do not, there are stories blank enough. A lot of Hemingway is this way. There are stories blank enough that if you don't project something from your life and experiences onto it, you're going to read it and think, oh, who gives a damn? Who cares? What a boring story. F. Scott Fitzgerald is this way to an extent. He jazzes things up a bit, if I can use a timeline appropriate word. He jazzes things up a bit from Hemingway, and I think there are other writers still, such as William Faulkner, who you might have a damn good chance of projecting something from your own life onto it, if only for the fact that you could get through it, right? There is so, and I don't mean you, I mean all of us. I can't tell you how many times I have tried and failed to read some type of Faulkner about some type of thing, and it's just impenetrable at times. And that's another thing. So while and whereas some genres, I will say fantasy, might be impenetrable from time to time because of all the things you have, all the mental images you have to generate, oftentimes, if they are competently written enough, it's manageable. You can voyage through. But with literary fiction, if you don't have the right amount of sugar in your bloodstream, you might not be getting through that chapter because you're going to fall the hell asleep. One thing that I have struggled with recently is Malcolm Lowry, Under the Volcano. Not struggled in the sense that it's not enjoyable, but struggled in the sense that that guy has such a vocabulary that your mind is constantly being toggled back and forth between things. And you think, oh, well, that's an interesting word. Why use it there? And you realize that your eyes have skimmed 3 lines down and you don't know what happened there. So then you got to go back to said interesting word and remember where you were at that point. Not only that, but writers like Lowry, writers like Faulkner, rely so much on things not going on the page. I'm not even talking about books anymore, but I think that a healthy discussion of quote-unquote literature and classics is absolutely necessary. And one of the things that makes bookshelf tours from time to time interesting, I think there is a lot of bookshelf tour action going on that I can't get into because it's like a book haul. And I don't know. Now I'm just being crotchety on top of wandering off on separate statements. But okay, The Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger. There is a review for this book on the channel. I was not emphatic about the book, but I came to an interesting conclusion about the book. If you have or care to watch that review, which I will not ruin here, but I think it was a question worth asking when you get into some of the actions of our protagonist. It's a well-written book. I have problems with the characters a little bit. I have problems with the... It's difficult to say that I have problems with the narrative, but credit it for being a well-written book. Here's the thing. It's absolutely... I can see this absolutely being the book that was intended to have been written. But I don't like it. And I think that is a, for that type of criticism, it is an absolute necessity that, that you throw that in there. So for example, I've read a lot of books that are slop on the page, and they're not enjoyable because of that. This is not slop on the page. I just didn't enjoy it. Next, Leo Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. There is as well a review for this on the channel. This is a pretty good experience. It is surprisingly funny. It is surprisingly... It is deceptively lighthearted. I will say it that way. It's an experience. It is definitely an experience. I got a lot of highlights in here. Where's the one? There's one, I think it's the opening line, actually. I think the opening line here is real funny. Nope, it's not that. God dang it. I wish I could remember it, but it was one of these lines where you're reading along and you realize that I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just God dang it. Is it the end line? Is it the last line? I know it's in the review. Yes, there it is. Well then, let there be pain. I thought that was a pretty good line. I haven't read this in a long time now. But yeah, definitely worth reading. Next. I can't remember who it is. There's someone who has, for years in the comment sections here on Stripped Cover Lit, popped in and out asking me, aren't you embarrassed? Aren't you embarrassed you haven't read the Greek texts? Aren't you embarrassed you haven't read the classics of classics? Aren't you embarrassed you haven't read the books for which the term classics was invented? No. No, I'm not. The world of literature is such a big place, I don't have to read your goddamn favorites. That said, I have the Odyssey here. Homer's The Odyssey. And no, I haven't read it. I will at some point get around to this on the channel. One of the reasons that I haven't really gotten into the ancient texts, I am not an ancient texts historian. While and whereas I believe that you don't have to be in order to read them, and you certainly don't have to be in order to talk about them, I think that there is some deal of that should be brought into the texts. Why don't I believe that you should have to know all the ancient history in order to talk about these things? Because if you had to, then these texts would not have lived so long. If you had to, these texts would be seen simply as historical texts and not as great works of literature. The part of literature which lives on through these texts are the people inside them, not the fact that this type of sandal meant that this individual was from said place, whereas the fact that this individual was walking around barefoot means that he was from said place. That is not the part of the literature that makes it great. It might be part of the story that makes it great. It might be part of the details that would only be translatable by someone who is a major in history. That does not mean that it is what makes the text live on. What makes the text live on is that the people inside the text live on. You know, let's just open it to a random page and see who's... Okay, so let me catch a name. Pallas Athena sped away in the lead. I don't know who Pallas Athena is off the top of my head, but you know a Pallas Athena. Athena inspires the prince. I don't know who the prince is, but you will have met the prince. All of these people are people that you could translate into your workday, right? That's the part that makes these stories live on. Next, another massive book I haven't read, Ulysses. So I have to confess, James Joyce makes me feel like such a dunce. James Joyce makes me feel like such a dunce from time to time because there's... Where's all my Joyce? See, this is part of the problem with doing a classics bookshelf tour. I keep remembering all the books that I have and that I have read, and in fact that I have put on the channel that I do not seem to have in front of me. Here we go. Just destroying the shelf. James Joyce, Ulysses. Depending on who you ask, the absolute greatest book ever written. I do not know. I would not know. I have not read it. This is something which is, I think, hailed as the all-time great because someone somewhere said it. No one else read it. So they felt, ooh, I was supposed to read that in college. Yeah, I think it's the greatest too. And if I say I think it's the greatest, why don't you keep telling why you think it's the greatest? I don't have to answer that question. I think that far fewer people have actually read. It's sort of like Infinite Jest. I think far fewer people have actually read it and quote-unquote understood it than claim to. I think that there is probably a whole lot of Wikipedia searching going on, reading of summaries and excerpts from the novel, and then I can claim I read it, and you know, it's been so long, I just don't remember that part. I think that's what happens a lot with books like Ulysses or Infinite Jest. Hell, I think that's probably what happens with the Odyssey. But hell, that's what happens with the Bible. But Ulysses is a book that I know I got to get around to. I know I got to read it. I know I got to get it off the list at some point. Life is short and Ulysses is long. So we'll see. Next, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Really, really good. There is a review for there's a read-along and review for this on the channel. It is something I was supposed to have read in college, ironically, and I did not, but I read it afterwards. So that's what counts, right? You get around to it when you get around to it. You do it when you do it. There is so much stuff going on in here. I definitely missed a whole lot of stuff. But again, that's one of the things that makes literature with the capital L, is that each time you read it, not only do you notice more, but each time you read it, you have a different understanding of the text. You notice different things. You're in a different place. That text means a different thing. I hate to keep going back to As I Lay Dying, but it's something that's been in my mind recently. I think that there are enough characters in As I Lay Dying, and enough narratives. Why don't I just... Here. As I Lay Dying, William Faulkner. I think that there are enough characters and As I Lay Dying and enough narratives that each time you read it, you will associate with someone else. For me, the first time I read it, it was Darl. Darl struck me as a writer, to be perfectly frank. Darl struck me as William Faulkner planting himself in the novel. He was, after all, he was a narrator of other people's stories, was Darl. He was able to read other people, was Darl. The second time I read it, I identified a little more with Cash, and I think that is something which probably happens as people get older. I think that if people like Jewel were, this sounds awful. If people like Jewel were able to read the novel and able to get something out of the novel and able to actually sit down and concentrate on the novel long enough, people like Jewel would identify with Jewel. I think that there are absolutely, and look, to identify with a character is not necessarily to favor the character. Yeah, I think that to identify with a character is not necessarily to favor the character. So I think that Daddy Bundren, there are people who would identify with Anse, but they would not favor Anse. And that depends on where they are in life. If they were the father of several children, if they were older, if they were this or that, they would. If they felt run down at the time they read the novel, Anse is probably the character with whom they would identify, but would almost obviously not favor. And then you have characters like Peabody. Characters like Peabody who are judging the family. And if you cannot identify with any of the characters in the novel, you get to identify with Peabody and just go ahead and judge all the Bundrens. This was a story, when I was supposed to read it in college, I read part of it. I did my best. I promise I did my best. But there was a conversation in class. So part of the reason that I moved towards doing read-alongs and then a review on the channel was that I felt it more accurately described the good part of going to college for literature. The good part of the experience of literature classes, which is discussion around the text as we're reading it. One of the discussions around this text as we were reading it was about the downtrodden nature of the Bundrens. And it was... She was one of my favorite college professors, so I don't like to say this, but she was hoity-toity. And there was everyone in the class identifying with her, right? But being hoity-toity as well, and judging the Bundrens. And I sort of raised my hand and said, hey, any one of us is one real bad day from being the Bundrens. So I did not go to a really great college. I went to a state university that was open admission, basically, open admission. So basically it was a community college with a 4-year degree that offered a 4-year degree. They even offered master's degrees, but basically open admission. So no one in there was particularly wealthy. Even all of them whose mommies and daddies were paying for college, they weren't having their mommies and daddies pay for them to go to Northwest, to go to Mizzou. They were going to Missouri Western State University. So even the hoity-toities in the class weren't hoit and toit. So the sort of argument that I had was, I guarantee you most of those people didn't have insurance. Their father's insurance or their mother's insurance from work didn't cover them after they hit 18, didn't cover them after they moved out of the house. So they didn't have health insurance. Well, imagine you get jackknifed on the way to work and that car wreck breaks your leg. You're not going to work. You don't have health insurance. You've got this debt for college. Do you know how much the ambulance ride to the hospital costs? A whole lot of money, let alone all the days that you have to sit in that bed. You're one day away from being a Bundren? You think you're going to have the wherewithal, let alone the support, to go back to college after this has happened? So now you don't have a degree in a world where everyone has a degree. And the classes that you did take, well, they were in English literature. How well does that translate to the workforce? Let me tell you, not at all. So now with all that debt and the necessity to get a job because of all that debt, where are you going to work? You're that close. You're one bad day away from being a Bundren. So that is, as I lay dying, if I did not manage to get this depressing enough. Next, a novel that we went through chapter by chapter here on the channel, Absalom, by William Faulkner. Boy, was this a beast. I was not expecting it to be so difficult. I was not expecting to come out of this novel with a love for a character that is apparently detested around the board, just roundly detested. But it did. I think that there's, and that brings us back around to the fact that where you are in life when you read a text is going to change with whom you identify. So no, I did not identify with Miss Coldfield. No, I did not identify with Quentin. I identified with, where's the man bear pig? What was it? The man bear demon? I can't find it. I identified with Sutpen because Sutpen had a relentless work ethic, and look, those may have been the only ethics Sutpen knew. Sutpen made a lot of mistakes in his life, but he seemed to have always meant the best for someone else. I think that character can adequately be summed up with the word duty, not D-O-O-D-I-E, D-U-T-Y. He seemed to have at least felt he always knew what was best, if that did not include what would feel best. Certainly there were people that he screwed over. Certainly there were people that would have absolutely been right to detest him in this book. Hey man, that's life. That's life. Unfortunately, that's life. It is a text that really harkens back to a different age in as far as the sort of the idea that big people live big lives. And I don't mean size. Although I think Sutpen was supposed to be a really big individual, tall and portly. What I mean is, big people, big personalities, they're going to make somebody's life a whole lot better. But the give and pull of the universe means that's going to make somebody's life a whole lot worse as well. And I think that there used to be a sense of responsibility about that. Everyone is responsible, ultimately, for their own life. So you don't let that big person make your life worse. Which is something that we've... the idea of personal responsibility, I think, is a hazy one in today's society. And that the idea that a great person, and there are great people, having a single skeleton in their closet means that guy's no better than the bum on the side of the street drinking stolen vodka every night, which is a silly thing we do in America. Americana, at some point, sort of flipped on that dime, or turned on that dime, flipped face to where there are no great people. It seemed that Americana used to be about worshiping great people, which I don't think that's healthy either. But to have about-faced and realized there are no great people, and anyone who claims, anyone with a claim to greatness, we shouldn't trust them, we should tear them down, we should set them on fire and send them on their way. It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing. Anyway, The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. Another book I never finished. The first chapter in this, I think it's the first chapter, the most confusing thing I've ever read in my life. The most confusing thing I've ever read in my life. It is from the perspective of Benji, and Benji has challenges. But damn you, Faulkner, why do that to your reader? Here's the thing. William Faulkner might love you, but that doesn't mean he has to care about you. William Faulkner is absolutely willing to destroy you and make you feel like an absolute moron simply for the sake of telling the story he kind of wants to tell. He's not even sure at times that's the story he wants to tell, but he's going to put it out there, and you're going to have to deal with it. Moving on. That's all my Faulkner. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. If I have a book written by a Russian, it's going to be in this part of the bookshelf tour, because I only have Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and well, actually that's not true. I have a play from Chekhov that will not appear in this part of the shelf tour. I'm going to have to do a plays part of the shelf tour as well. My plays shelf has grown considerably in the past year or so. Crime and Punishment, supposedly one of the greatest novels of all time. Never read it. Don't know that I have the tools. This is an imposing text. This is one of the ones that I think almost everyone is scared of when they go in, and probably for good reason. You don't want to be the guy who read Crime and Punishment and thought it was all right. So there's a lot of pressure to believe that it really is great, and not only that it is great, but you understand why. Next, I have what is supposedly, the first novel ever written. At least that's how it was presented to me. And I think from what I've found, that is accurate. The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki. I wrote a paper on this in college titled The Tale of Genji, a meandering tale of a philandering male. I thought that was pretty good. It's a title that I still remember to this day. This is, from what I understand, an abridged version. From what I understand, the actual text is massive. I don't know. I've never seen it. This is one that is difficult to find in person. So, in fact, I think this is the only copy of this that I have ever held in person. So, yeah. Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki. It is trying to remember a good take for this. It's definitely worth reading. It is another, so if Absalom is a study of the impact of great people on not as great people, The Tale of Genji is a compounding of that. So I think that idea that big people are going to live big lives and you either have to get the good or get out of the way, because there's going to be bad to follow, there's going to be a wake of that experience. I think that that is an ancient idea. I really do. And I think a lot of that is the fact that when you go back as far as, when was this written? Early 11th century. When you go back this far, That idea is absolutely true. Anyone who was willing to take up the sword and turned out to be really good with it was going to be a great person, and there were going to be consequences, ramifications. So I think that is absolutely a part of that. Another book I haven't read, Candide by Voltaire. Not only have I not read this, one of the embarrassments to my entire education, I only heard this book mentioned once in community college by a psychology professor. It was from that mention that I decided, well, I probably better have the text. And it never came up useful in my entire education. But it's something I want to get around to at some point. It is, again, one of the texts that I am ultimately intimidated by because Voltaire, and because of the import that it claims, and I have zero interaction with the text, with the writer, with any of the thing. Look, the ideas that are purportedly expressed in this text are not things that I have ever come across in my education. So I would be going into this text naked. The next, the brothers Karamazov, The Brothers Russian by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Another chunker. Big old text. This is something for which there will eventually be a read-along on the channel. I'm absolutely going to get around to it. I've got a full plate right now. I'm not sure exactly when this read-along will be, but it will be. Next is one that I did read in college. I don't know if I should put this on fantasy. Now I'm going to do it now. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. I think that it is, I don't know why I'm going to put it in this one, but I am. It was a text that I thought was difficult. It was challenging, but it was worth the investment. It is one that I had to bite and claw, scratch and scrape to get through while I was in college, but I got through it. I don't have all of the recollection of it that I would like, simply because there was, I did a lot of, when you're a literature major, you have to plan a lot, especially when you're I'm a slow reader. You have to plan a lot, you have to plot a lot, or you're not going to get enough reading done even to finish your degree. Because not only do you have to read 4 books, but you got to write a paper on one of them, and you've got to show enough competence with the other 3, But basically, always you finish 3 or 4 books, Gulliver's Travels is one that I think I finished outside of the required reading regiment. But it was one of those ones where you sit down and you say, okay, I've got to read 35 pages a day to finish this sucker. And I got to read 40 pages a day of Lady Murasaki. And I've got to read 20 pages a day of whatever goddamn, Jane Austen that I've got to read. Just whatever it was, you had to read it and get through it. But you had, if you are planning to study literature, but you have not, and you are hoping to get there, take note of this. Schedule out your reading. Now, if you have to read 30 pages and you're feeling good that day, read 35, read 40, read whatever you can, because there's going to be a day where it's a struggle. But if you don't do that, and you think, it's just a 150-page book, 2 days out from having to have it read, that's 75 pages a day. Say it takes you, and the struggle is not simply to read it, simply to have your eyes skim across the page. You've got to realize what's in there. You've got to think exactly what you feel about the text and how to say it. And you have to understand not only why that text is being read in this class, but how it relates to the other texts which you are reading in that class. Those are the things not only that you are supposed to get and understand for your grade, but those are the things that you want to understand, and that's why you're there. You're an English literature major. What else are you doing? That was one of the problems that I had in college, predominantly with other English literature majors who would half-ass things. It was like, look, you're not getting a job for your degree. What are you doing here reading just to finish assignments? That is not going to work. You're getting nothing out of that. Oh, but I digress. Next, George Orwell's Animal Farm. This is a text that I really enjoy. If I do start getting tattoos, the image of Boxer pushing that boulder up the hill, that is definitely a tattoo that I want. It reminded me so much of, we must imagine Boxer happy in his toil. We must imagine Sisyphus happy as he pushes the boulder up the hill. Right? Jacques Derrida. Interesting text, good text, something that depending on your capacity for humor, depending on your capacity for farce, the text is going to be much different for you. I won't say that it could feel like a defense of communist ideals, but I will say that if your barometer for those things is off, you could come out with a mixed message. So, is Animal Farm literature or is it propaganda? It is artistic enough, certainly, to fall under the guise of literature, but one could argue that there's something definitive you're supposed to get out of this text, right? I think it's pretty easy to see what it is you're supposed to get out of this text. But even though that is the case, mightn't this text be grafted onto other ideas and other ideals? Does it have to be employed against or for communism? I don't know. I have not read another writer with whom, even Swift, I have not read another writer with whom I struggle with this as strongly as I do George Orwell. I think that if your piece is written for an express purpose or goal at the end, that makes it propaganda. That makes it propaganda. No matter how artful it's done, no matter how well it's executed, that makes it propaganda. I don't know. Next, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I really enjoyed this text. One of the best guy books I've ever read. This you get a sense of camaraderie with, what was his name? Candy? What was his name? There's Curly, Slim. Was it Candy? Who's the main the guy everybody looks up to? I think it was Candy. I haven't read that in years. I need to get back to it. But I'm not going to spoil the ending, but that ending feels like getting shot in the head. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to get through. It's hard to, especially when you have all the little moments that set it up, when you have all of the little moments that exactly mimic that moment. Next, I have Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Again, a well-written, difficult text, difficult not for the writing, but for the subject matter. It is something that is look, you end up liking Humbert, and you know you shouldn't. You end up, but you never sympathize with Humbert. But every time you open the book, you're looking forward to the things that come out of his mouth. And that's part of the magic of this text. This is a text that's hard to talk about. It's a book which is filled with things you don't want to think. And you get to place the blame on humble Humbert, because it's his story. But you're still the dumb son of a bitch that's opening that book. You're still the one that's actually there. You're the realest person involved. But I'll be goddamned. Just listen. Opening part of the text. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lo-li-ta. The tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lo-li-ta. She was low, plain low, in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in 1 sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms she was always Lolita. Did she have a precursor? She did. Indeed, she did. In point of fact, there may have been no Lolita at all, had I not loved one summer a certain initial girl child in a princedom by the sea. Oh, when? About as many years before Lolita was born as my age was that summer. You can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, exhibit number 1 is what the seraphs, the misinformed, simple, noble-winged seraphs, envied. Look at this tangle of thorns. Jesus H. Christ. The writing in this is so butter smooth. And there are points where it's difficult. But you're going to get that from someone who is so adept at writing as was Nabokov. You're going to get that. You're going to run into stumbling blocks with someone who is trying to do as much with the text as was Nabokov. Moving on, The Sun Also Rises. Oh, there's a review. Oh, there's a review of Mice and Men on the channel. There's a review for Animal Farm on the channel. There's a review for Lolita on the channel. There is a review for The Sun Also Rises on the channel. The Sun Also Rises was not my favorite Hemingway experience. I still prefer Ernest Hemingway as a short story writer. Hell, I'd like to read his poetry. His first ever published work was, I think, called 3 Short Stories and 10 Poems, something like that. I have yet to gain access to any of that poetry. I would be interested to see what Ernest Hemingway poetry looks like. The Sun Also Rises is a story. It's just a story, man. I don't really have a whole lot of praise to heap upon it. I left the novel glad I read it because I checked another Hemingway off the list, but not really impressed. Speaking of not really impressed, Ernest Hemingway, To Have and Have Not. While I was in college, or while I was getting my grad degree. Like I say, I dedicated myself to becoming a monk. I was just a creature of the craft. And I read To Have and Have Not over a weekend. And I don't even remember the story. I don't even remember the story. And this would have been in 2013, not that long ago, not long enough to have forgotten the entire story and plot and characters. It read to me, I remember the impression I got. The impression I got from it was The Killers is one of my least favorite Hemingway short stories. It feels like The Killers with some flour mixed in order to make it bigger. That's how it feels to me. Even I just have the memory of it. I don't have what the novel is about or anything. It just felt like that to me. I know that the protagonist was a real rough guy. Maybe he was missing a leg. Don't remember too much. That's how much I liked it. Next, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Absolute classic. This was the last great work to come from the man. It was written during a time when everyone was saying Ernest Hemingway was washed up, if you pardon the pun, was washed up and was no good, and everything that he was ever going to write that was any good was already written. And then he came out with The Old Man and the Sea. Why? Because fuck you, that's why. It is a very quick read, but it need not be so. It is possible to spend a whole lot of time with The Old Man and the Sea, to buddy up with Santiago, because it's such a beautiful story. And it is a story that comes up just short of happy. And what more could you ask from Ernest Hemingway? What more could you ask from Ernest Hemingway? Speaking of Ernest Hemingway, A Movable Feast. Sort of a memoirish. This was definitely... so there's a review for The Old Man and the Sea on the channel. There's a review for A Movable Feast on the channel. It was a text that was fun. I will say it is the most fun I've ever had reading Hemingway, because you definitely feel Hemingway bouncing off of other people. And anytime you feel Hemingway bouncing off of other people, you have to wonder how honest he's being, how correct he is in his assessment. But that being said, the reliability of a narrator has always been one of my favorite things to play with inside a text, has always been one of my favorite things to ask about a text. And because of that, A Movable Feast is absolutely a joy to read. I don't think, in fact, I would say if you don't enjoy Hemingway, if you don't enjoy the expatriate movement, if you do not enjoy those elements of the teens and 20s in art, you're not going to enjoy this text. Don't pick it up. But if you do enjoy those things, this is definitely what... His interactions with F. Scott Fitzgerald are gold. Just absolute gold. Speaking of F. Scott Fitzgerald, I think the only individual novel that I own from him is The Great Gatsby. I have some collected works from Fitzgerald. There is a review for The Great Gatsby here on the channel. It is one that I have thought very heavily about doing a chapter-by-chapter read-along through. Let me know if it's something you might enjoy. It's something I want to do. I want to do it when I have the ability to concentrate well on the text and actually do it some form of justice. The trouble with doing a straight-up review for the text without a read-along is that you're not going to be doing it enough justice. So despite the fact that there is already a review on the channel, I would like to go back and do a read-along for the book. It is a book that I enjoy more every time I read it. Ironically, I was supposed to have read it about 14 times for school at different times, and I didn't finish it any of those times. It was not until I was, I think, again in grad school, that I went back and read it for pleasure and study as opposed to class and grades. And it was infinitely more enjoyable that way. And I was able to really sort of enjoy the characters. The Great Gatsby, the characters are what really make it go. And you want to talk again about great people will be great people and other people will suffer. Great people will be great people, and there will be suffering. I think that's a better example of what you get out of The Great Gatsby. Next, a text that I read most of. I don't think I finished it. Maybe I will get around to doing a review and a read-along for this on the channel. I have a pay stub in here. From 2011 where I've got notes written on it. That is, wow. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. I always trip up and say Gustave Flaubert. I don't know why. Gusty Flonase. This is, I know I didn't finish this. This was a book that was roundly criticized. Yeah. You want to talk about being an asshole. I was supposed to read this for that same professor I mentioned earlier. Literature of the World, I believe. In fact, so one of the, nope, that's not the right one. One of the things we were prompted with for our papers, one thing that would be interesting, you could write your paper about in this class. And she was so hot to trot to get us to write about this subject that it was in the syllabus. You should try writing about this. Was how well did a male writer write female characters? Hashtag feminist theory. Hashtag who gives a damn. Hashtag every writer is flawed. But yeah, that was one of the main sticking points in the class. Every text. How well did Flaubert write Madame Bovary? How well did he get that character across? Could a woman really be that dastardly? On and on and on. On and on and on. Write about how well this male writer wrote about a woman. Write about how well this male writer wrote about it. Is it believable? Is it even believable? I know that these are classic texts of English literature, but is it even believable? I know these are classic texts of world literature, but how could a man ever write a woman? So that's when I wrote A Meandering Tale of a Philandering Male, The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki. I didn't finish Madame Bovary because I was so busy. That's what the paper was about, was the differences between how the male writer and the female writer wrote the opposite gender. The final classic I have here, this may be the most contested claim, I would imagine. Though it is often cited as one of the greatest books of all time, I don't know that you see it very often cited as a classic, and it is The Stranger by Albert Camus. There is a review for this on the channel. It was, I have to admit, disappointing. It wasn't bad, but as someone who has been a champion of the nihilist for as long as I have known the term, it was a little underwhelming. I wanted a little bit more out of it. I wanted something less melodramatic. I think that the melodrama is what definitely threw me off. So here, opening statement. One of the classic lines of literature. My mom died today. Or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. I got a telegram from home. Mother, deceased. Funeral, tomorrow. Faithfully, yours. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. It's downhill from there a little bit. I don't mean that it's bad. I don't mean that it's bad. It's definitely worth reading. But I wanted more out of it as someone who had been told 1,000,001 or 1,000,003 times this is a book that you have to read. So that is it for the classics portion of this of these bookshelf tours. Now I've got a whole lot of books that I have to go back and put on my shelves. So be sure, if nothing else, maybe pop down there and give me a like, because this has been over an hour of talking that I have done here. Give me a like, maybe give me a share if you know anyone else who is into classics. Make sure you are subscribed and jump over. I'm going to leave a pinned comment in the comment section. This is a 2-channel event. There's no one still watching this. Leave a comment that you're still watching this if you're still here, but I know you're not. This is part of a 2-channel event. I'm doing 30 videos in 30 days here on Strip Cover Lit, but also 30 videos in 30 days over on my personal channel. I will leave a pinned comment down there to that channel. Be sure to go over there, and there will not be classics over there, but there will be other books.